Hello, everyone, and welcome to CodeCast by STL Tech Talk, where we'll be giving you instructional, informative, unique, and insightful commentary on programming, code, and technology. From robots to roadhouses, we will be bringing you the content you want and need. My name is JJ Hammond, and we are joined tonight by two coding experts. Up first, our guest. He is a entrepreneur, developer, and IT executive, mobile strategist, and the writer of best-selling mobile and wireless technological books. Also a pioneer of smartphone revolution, he drove the development of all important mobile app ecosystems from its earliest days and co-founded the world's first cloud-based mobile device management company. Whoa. As a mobile strategist at Microsoft, he is in demand as an advisor to executives and a speaker at conferences all over the world. He is responsible for the architect, development, and deployment of many of the world's mobile and wireless solutions for Fortune 100 companies, holy cow, through books, articles, videos, and workshops. He helps to empower CIOs, developers, IT professionals in areas of mobile strategy, wireless, data replication, device management, security, the cloud, and highly scalable infrastructures. He presents at industry conferences all over the world, including Dev Connections, TechEd, CTIA, VS Live, MEDC, Tech Ready, and Mobile World Congress. He's the creator of Microsoft Mobile line, a business solutions accelerator, an avid blogger, a published author, dozens of articles found in leading technological publications, as well as 5 best-selling books on mobile infrastructure and app development. He served in the U.S. Navy beneath the waves in a SEAL delivery vehicle and a Trident submarine. He began his programming journey through writing BASIC and all sorts of other stuff. Luckily, he moved on to something more relevant like Rex, programming for OS/2. Need I say more? The original Avenger, Rob Tiffany. Hello, Rob, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. OS/2. Dude, come on.
So yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
However, this show would not be possible without the human version of the Colt 45, King of the Hill in Minnesota, striving to distribute development knowledge to the masses, and has spent the last 20 years architecting and implementing highly scalable ASP.NET applications throughout the Twin Cities. The world is the awesome place with him in it. Say hello, Gus Emery.
And I have to bow in humbleness to Rob Tiffany. Your resume and bio is legendary. Glad to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us tonight.
It's great to be here.
That is like, usually I have to kind of build up some resumes or whatever, but holy cow, that was amazing. Just to even say that and know that you're here is two great things. Like I said, exclamation point on the end of a wonderful day. Don't forget to follow us on #CodeCast. Facebook/STL Tech Talk, Google+, subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Windows Phone, TuneIn Radio, or listen directly from our site. Visit stltechtalk.com to keep up with our tech news, podcast, CodeCast. Find out how you can advertise with us, obviously that would be awesome, or hire us to consult you on your technological needs. And don't forget you can interact with the show by sending us feedback to podcast@stltechtalk.com. And if you're watching us live, you can ask us questions via the chat room, and we will do our best to answer those questions in a timely manner. So without further ado, let's get the show kicked off. First question to Rob. How did you get into technology to begin with?
Wow, there I was at birth. No, not so much.
Right. Yeah. Strapped to my brain.
Yeah, exactly. So let's see. When I was, high school, junior high, I remember having a Timex, 2000, CX2000, SX, whatever it was, 1000. It was really small, In fact, by any stretch, it would be considered a small device, almost like what we would think of today. And you could do basic programming on that. So that's kind of what I got started with. I think it had I think I bought the expansion module where you could get an extra 16K of memory. So that was rocking. Thermal printers, stuff like that. What's cool is when I was in college, the basic I learned on then was, does anybody remember GW Basic by chance?
I do.
So what was cool about that is years later I ended up getting to work with the guy who created that particular variant of Basic, which was cool.
Yeah.
But that's out of order. Because that's an interesting story into itself there. but I would say most of the stuff happened when I was in the military, when I was in the Navy. I was totally into that stuff, and I was serving on a Trident submarine at the time, and I was totally getting into OS2 for some reason. I think one of the lieutenants on my submarine thought it was cool at the time. This was right after Microsoft and IBM had their divorce.
Yep.
Oh,
so,
sure.
so their first version was OS2 2.0. That was the IBM version, and if you'll realize, I mean, basically Microsoft and IBM cross-licensed a lot of things to make some of that stuff happen. Anybody who's been in the mobile space for the last decade, if you remember something called the Compact Framework, .NET, there were actually 4 guys on that team who were on the original OS2 team developing that, from the Microsoft contingent down in Boca Raton in the 80s, working with IBM during those days, building the kernel while the IBMers were building the UI. So interesting stuff there. But yeah, I started teaching myself to program more on the sub, if I wasn't driving the sub, and things like that, or being out on the lookout or something like that, I mean, being on a Trident submarine's a little more boring because, you're basically just kind of going down there 5 knots to nowhere, waiting for the message from the president to nuke everybody, right? Yeah. Whereas working with the SEALs on a SEAL team delivery vehicle, that was a lot more exciting. So I didn't have as much time with the SEALs to program, but with the Trident, yeah, I had a little more time. I think what really put me over the top, and I know I got a lot of sand kicked in my face in the 90s because of this, was Visual Basic. I'm one of those guys. I didn't get my degree in computer science. I got my degree in political science, and so I totally got into VB and Access. Actually, I was doing Paradox, I think, before that, and DBase. But started building stuff, on the submarine. We started rebuilding some of the things you might call the HR stuff in the military, fitness reports, things like that. So that's kind of so I started doing a lot more stuff there. VB, Access, some Rex, 32-bit Rex on OS2. Which really didn't help me a lot, but OS2 was pretty cool. It seemed to out-multitask anything Microsoft had at the time, in much less RAM too. So that was super cool. Once I got out of the Navy, I conned my way into a job, and so let's see if that's like the 1994 getting out of the military. VB was exploding. If you knew VB and you knew, any kind of database or the fledgling SQL Server. I don't know if we had SQL Server 6 by then or not. Maybe not.
That was about 96.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it was pretty slim pickings. But yeah, lots of fun stuff. Got to work for some cool startups. That's kind of how I got into. In the long scheme of things, I came to the mobile space by being in the wireless space.
Sure.
And so. The good thing is I had a lot of great mentors. If I think about really who really taught me a lot of stuff, working at a startup, when you're the kid and you're working with all the graybeards that you would joke about, and so I'm sure you can't relate to that. And anyway, but guys who taught me how to build what's a state machine, how do you do XOR and stuff like that? How do you know how to do bit encoded packets? And so I think what kind of drove my behavior and where I am today, I mean, there's the general programming thing, but I really feel like, a lot of us have a field that we're in. And I don't necessarily say my field is programming. I'm a wireless mobile guy from way back. And so I worked at this company called Real Time Data, not too original, but we basically built a system to monitor vending machines wirelessly. Now, these are old-school vending machines, not new computerized cool ones with DEX interfaces or things like that. And so imagine the scenario where you're working somewhere where you're retrofitting old vending machines with cabling to detect when the spools are going, to see when products have been bought, how much money's in the machine, is there an alarm going off. Things that we think of today, when you think of the Internet of Things, you see a lot of IoT examples. People love to use vending machine as an example.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, we did it when it was really hard, and so we had our own firmware. We had our own black box that we would put in a vending machine, retrofit it. We would write our own C agent and burn it into EPROMs to put into those machines. we had to do wireless when wireless was hard. Can you imagine a time when you go into any given city, there's no such thing as wireless coverage everywhere. A different company or technology would cover a different wedge of the pie, per se, of around a city. And so we would, and who knows if you remember something called a digiboard.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
So we had a lot of RS-232 going on back then. We had to write our own modems. We were creating our own packets. We were bouncing them off of 450 megahertz business radio towers. We were wireless enabling vending machines with this stuff. If you had a bank of vending machines, we created our own little LAN for machines, daisy chaining with RS-232 with a gateway. It's kind of funny because I'm hearing these same terms over and over again now in the last year with this IoT thing. People are doing the exact same thing.
Just repurpose.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think coming from that background where we had to pay by the byte for wireless data connectivity.
Oh, sure. Right.
You know, you learn. You were building these tiny bit encoded binary packets because it counted so much more. I think about when we fast forwarded to, you know, whatever, 99, 2000, whatever, when the whole SOAP thing started exploding and SOA, and overnight everybody was building things with SOAP and XML, and .NET came out and it made it easy to do that, to build web services. But mentally, I just couldn't get on board with that because SOAP and XML, you know, represented probably arguably the most bloated wire protocol ever conceived by man. You know, luckily I've seen ones that are even worse. But you know, in the end, those are the kinds of things I always preach to other folks who are in the wireless business. Is you know, a lot of people mistake UX and UI for some reason. I hear people do that all the time. When I talk about
bothers the bejesus.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of UX is if I'm holding my device, my phone here, and I hit a button to retrieve data, let's say. What they need to think about is I'm going to click that button, I'm going to make some kind of call that's going to go to the nearest cell tower with you and about 1,500 of your best friends. Then it's going to go down the tower, and there's a base station at the bottom. And then it's going to go on this backhaul network, and then it's going to jump onto the public internet. Then it's going to bounce around and find its way to your web server. And it's going to go through your front firewall, through your DMZ, your back firewall, and it's going to queue up on your web server, get the answer, and then it's going to go all the way back through that whole deal and then present data to you. All that is part of the UX. And too many people don't think or care about that, and they're not thoughtful about the user experience. And so if I used SOAP and XML or data sets or some giant wire protocol to get data, I know it's going to take longer. It's going to be sluggish, especially if I'm going over some slow, you know, speed thing like GPRS. Whereas if I'm doing something smaller, you know, if I decide to use REST instead of SOAP or JSON instead of XML, or if I have the opportunity to use WebSockets or some kind of binary protocol. Now, I know binary, though, unfortunately locks you into technologies. Doesn't work everywhere. But being thoughtful about that means so much. There's always a zillion different ways to skin a cat. And I think if developers think about when they think everybody and their dog has become a mobile developer overnight, you know, since the iPhone 3G came out, basically.
Right.
But they're bringing their desktop development and their wired Ethernet habits along with them. And you know, so when I think of best practices, a lot of times it's you know, it's stuff around that. You know, people used to talk about getting best practice, like so when we were building apps for the Pocket PC, for instance, ruggedized devices. You know, let's go back to 2003, 2004, you know, and on. And people are like, what are best practices? You know, and I'd hear people bring in their silly code best practices from the desktop, and I'm just like, you're crazy. Best practices is you need to throw out all those cool design patterns that all the really smart developers told you to do, and they wrote the Gang of Four, those guys wrote the books and everything like that. You got to throw all that stuff out, and you need to get right to the metal, because this device is so slow and has so little memory that you don't have time, and you can't ever forget that the user could care less about what cool patterns you followed, or what paradigm, or what cool new methodology you're using this week. You know, they want something that rocks. They want it fast and reliable. You know,
simple, easy, and fast.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That's all good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. First, Crimson Tide was like one of my favorite movies. So you probably heard that a million times, but Denzel's the shit in that movie. So is Gene Hackman, but this neither here nor there. It's probably not even real. But you said you were going to go down there and explode the world, so I just wanted to say that. Secondly, I love your backdrop. I'm a huge Windows Phone fan, so I like the backdrop. Very cool stuff. I know there's other stuff up there. Yeah, there's more than just that up there, but very hot, very cool. The third thing is absolutely, I mean, hands down, that is really, again, and I've said this in front of Gus too, just understanding that you have to, is either a coder or a developer, get in and start doing something that involves this kind of learning where you try something out, it's not going to work. It almost never works the first time. And a lot of these guys that we talk to who are professionals like yourself, or who came up and maybe they didn't necessarily go to school for this, but they figured it out as they went along, and they really got good at it. And how they did it was just doing things, like actually making things with Adrenos or whatever the case may be, is just like little Internet of Things. And you just touched on a whole bunch of stuff there. But obviously that is a very hot. And it's been, like you said before, it was cool, but I think it's always been one of those things that people work towards. I mean, you look at Star Trek Next Generation, just all the things that Apple has kind of gleaned off of in their design model. It's all this other kinds of stuff. So, just this final push that we're seeing into these more back-end services and stuff. And you're right, UX and UI completely different, and there's two different teams that handle that. I mean, because working on the UI design, it has to be able to handle that and make it simple, fast, and easy. And we see it all the time. I mean, especially kind of with the Android store is just flooded with apps that are terribly slow, or they have maybe really good UI design, but they don't have very good UX design. So. Yeah. I'm not looking at those models and not looking at how that application lifecycle, that experience for the consumer, that experience for the back end, and then being able to maintain it and all that. So very awesome stuff. Gus, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, Rob, you reminded me of my young bringings into the development era, because I worked for a time clock company that did electronic time clocks, and we did RS-485 locally.
Oh, yeah.
And that was even pickier than RS-232 or anything else. Half the time you'd wire it right and it still wouldn't work. So
I remember my RS-232 VBX control from Saks Software, Those were the good old days. That's, I
remember writing that stuff too, because like you, I was doing reports in Access and in VB for the time clocks, right? Because companies wanted reports that didn't exist, so we went out and built them and did whatever. But to switch back into the show, why don't you tell us a little bit about Microsoft Mobility today?
Sure. Well, it's been a roller coaster ride.
To say the least.
I won't spend too much time on the past. We'll focus on today. Absolutely. So getting involved with Microsoft Mobility, like lots of folks, I was an embedded MVP, which now you can understand. I was building lots of embedded stuff, but actually it was probably from one of my books on SQL CE, I think. But from there, ended up in Microsoft. I actually built a device management company and sold it, and then right after that joined Microsoft. And so I was a PM back in the Windows Mobile days on the team. Lots of SDK stuff. Lots of you've probably seen and used code that I wrote if you used those products back then.
I wish I could touch you. I wish you were close enough for me to touch and say.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for JJ. He's a consummate geek. Don't mind him.
No, that's cool. No, yeah, it was lots of fun, and so but definitely, there was a time when we had almost 50% market share globally in the smartphone space back in the 2000s with Windows Mobile. But no doubt about it, it was just us and BlackBerry most of the time.
Right.
Yes.
You know, even Nokia hadn't gotten a lot of tractions with their smartphones. They were still mostly doing this feature phone. Obviously, no doubt about the iPhone changed everything. So if you fast forward, you know, part of your little history lesson of Microsoft Mobility, you know, CE in the 90s, the Pocket PC, or actually we had palm-sized PC, then we did Pocket PC, then Windows Mobile. Windows Phone is where everything changed.
Right.
And that's where we kind of splintered. We were kind of reacting to the iPhone, no doubt about it. We needed a better UX, a better consumer device, and so we built Windows Phone 7. That's where everybody just learned about Metro, which I guess we can't say anymore. Modern, whatever.
Yeah.
But that I still have my book of Metro. I actually have this black book. Metro is, you know, it's really funny too because people mistakenly all the time talk about Metro apps and they forget that it's a design language and it's not an app. You know, it's great UI principles to follow.
Absolutely.
You know, which you could apply to any platform. It wouldn't even have to be Windows Phone, for instance, or big Windows anymore.
Yeah, that was a big draw for me. I mean, we're part of the Windows Phone user group here, and you know, I mean, I love it. I really enjoy the design. I mean, like you said, that it doesn't have to be locked into that, but just the overall you know, experience, the flat and all that. But go ahead, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. So our Windows Mobile code, which is 6.5 was the last version we built. We gave that to the embedded team, and so they had version 6.5.3 that they've been using for a while, and those rugged devices that, you know, a lot of field service people use, scanners, and so embedded got that. Then the Windows Phone guys kind of went down the path with Phone 7 and Mango. And no question, you know, we probably didn't quite have that market share anymore that we used to back when we had an enterprise device.
Right.
And so the good news today, after kind of not so hot number of years, is, you know, part of this has been pouring in all those enterprise features back into the phone. Really started to see breakthroughs with Phone 8, just with basic stuff. Just the fact that we moved the NT kernel and started using that. Prior to that, we were always using Windows CE, our real-time OS, to do things. So, and you know, I was so surprised. I remember when Phone 8 came out, and to hear that, you know, NT, big Windows kernel, is hiding underneath there, and you just assume there's no way it could run as fast.
Yeah.
And yet it did, and we had BitLocker.
Even on the 520. I mean, on small device, I was like, what? This thing is blazing.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that's helped us as we've had to gain market share. Even, you know, obviously we've got 8.1. You're probably running 8.1 now with the developer preview.
Got it.
Excellent. But even with 8, you've seen us gaining market share around the world, country by country, going over 10%, sometimes going over 20%. I know you probably read the same stuff I do on the internet about that. One of those things is if you go back to those original reviewers, they love the Metro and the look and feel and all that stuff. Didn't necessarily help us with consumers with 7 and Mango. One other thing, though, when Phone 8 came out, it was a little more enterprise ready, and it ran so fast that lots of people were always remarking, wow, I noticed that this thing is so snappy, and even on low-end hardware, it runs really well. I think that served us tremendously because I've seen what the folks on the Android side of the fence have had to do over the years, throwing more and more cores at their phones to try to get performance out of them. You know, I think they're getting better at it now, but you know, after they left Gingerbread, their OS got really big and really slow, and they really had to throw lots of hardware at it to get performance. And so it was great for us to have a device that could, like you say, with the 520, could run on low-end hardware. In fact, 520 is our best-selling device globally.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks really good in different languages.
Yeah.
Sometimes Android or even iOS or whatever doesn't transfer over very well to say Asian language and stuff like that in the design. But I actually saw one and I was like, this is actually kind of cool. I mean, it looks native, right? It doesn't look foreign, so to speak. So that was really interesting, yeah. And one thing is the location-based service. I remember on the Windows Mobile side, back I think it was right before 6 or something like that. I was messing around with Blackjack or some kind of jazz.
Yeah, Blackjack.
Yeah, and the location-based services is back with Windows Phone 8.1. That is really cool, and I mean that's kind of something unique that I had just talked to somebody about this a couple hours ago. I said you can remind yourself to while you're at a specific point, your phone will remind you to pick up groceries or to do this or to do that, and was hot back when I remember using it then, and then it was gone, and now those features are coming back, and that is really cool.
Yeah. You know what? For me, I feel like I've been a foot soldier for our mobile team for years, you know, gutting it out as we've gone through the highs and the lows. And and it's funny because I feel the heat a lot. I do something, we have this giant building on campus called the Executive Briefing Center. And so I do these briefings to CEOs and CIOs every week. You know, talking to them about Windows Phone, about our all-up mobility, because I do a lot of mobile strategy, kind of end-to-end stuff. Talk about our device management offerings and things like that. And I absolutely have had the experience, kind of when we were during those Phone 7 and 7.5 days, where I would walk in and just get kicked in the teeth by these guys, you know, because it didn't have the enterprise features that they needed, you know, and you'd hear things like, "I don't even know why I'm talking to you," or, you know, "What are you doing here?" Which is always
you're like,
yeah, I'm always feeling the love there. But I'll tell you, I could feel the difference when Phone 8 came out. The tone changed, even though it was just simple things. I know it sounds silly. Oh, we got encryption, you know, or when we got FIPS certification, or things like that. Just little by little, the tone changed, started getting better feedback. And then, like I said, during this Phone 8 timeframe, over the last year and a half, let's say, seeing us in different parts of the world growing market share. You know, one thing you have to understand, not everybody understands, we live in la-la land here in the United States when it comes to phones.
Yes.
It's not the real world at all. We have subsidized phone plans. Americans don't pay the real costs of phones, and so no one has any concept of how much these things actually cost. And so while a certain phone can, you know, while the iPhone can just dominate here in the U.S., it's the cool phone to have. People love it. It's a great phone. Absolutely. It's great hardware. But once you leave North America and let's say most of Western Europe, you really fall off a cliff. The rest of the world, it shifts to economics completely.
Absolutely.
And it's no longer about status symbol or cool or whatever. Even though lots of people would love to have the iPhone, all of a sudden they don't have subsidized phone plans. Most of the world, you have to pay for your phone in advance. Then you find a plan to go with it. And so when all of a sudden you've got to pay $700 for an iPhone, guess what? You're not. You know, it just doesn't happen. Ergo, all of a sudden we have Android with an 80% market share. Well, why is that? It's because it can run on. It could, you know, there's lots of cheap phones. Everybody and their dogs making, because it's a free OS, right?
Sure.
Yep.
So it's the phone for the masses. And so what's cool now as we segue into our present and our near future, you know, and a lot of interesting stuff. When I was in Barcelona for our most recent Mobile World Congress, some of the announcements we made on not only are we doing great on low-end hardware, which is getting sales, because, you know, if you can go to Target or Walmart and buy our 520 device for whatever it is, 60, 70 bucks, all that translates globally. And so and without a plan, right?
Right.
You know, you don't have to have a plan. Just pop in your own SIM. So that's helped us everywhere else. We're pushing even further down to get our bill of materials, our BOM costs down on the phone, even more than what we have with the 520. Working with lower-end chipsets, because back to the story about, wow, that's amazing. Windows Phone 8 sure runs fast on low-end hardware. Well, we're going to have low-end devices that runs on like Qualcomm 100 and 200 chipsets. Less RAM, just using smaller storage, getting rid of hardware keys. I know this sounds silly, and just using soft keys. All these things affect the BOM cost of a device.
Right.
So we are absolutely making incredible moves to push the footprint of the device even smaller and lower the BOM cost so that we can absolutely attack that low-end Android space. That has, because if you think about where is Android getting all that 80% market share from, It's
Right.
from a lot of great, not so great phones. You know,
Right.
I'm a mobile guy generically. I have owned, just probably like you guys. I own every device of every type, and I can't speak authoritatively to a CEO if I'm not an expert at all my competitors' phones as well. So that goes with the territory. But a lot of where a lot of big market share is happening is the masses getting these cheap white label phones you've never even heard of, but they got Android for free. So let me tell you something interesting about our near-term future that doesn't have anything to do with all the great stuff in Phone 8.1. It has to do combining those BOM costs with these new agreements we've got with a bunch of new mobile operators. We've got new hardware manufacturers lined up. I think we got 10 more hardware manufacturers lined up to start building our devices, a lot of them in Asia. There are all kinds of phone manufacturers that you have never heard of that are dominating in China and Southeast Asia in a very localized way. And
Right.
so the fact that we're going to be able to penetrate into those markets is going to just be huge for us. And so new cool features aside, just some of those economic things is going to make all the difference for us. And so I'm definitely bullish. Obviously, I've had to be bullish, even though I've been getting kicked in the teeth now for a long time.
Well, when hearing you say this, it's like you were the ones that, because like in our user groups and when I'm talking to people, because we're gonna have events coming up this summer where we're gonna teach people how to write an app from start to finish and then be able to submit it to the store, like that whole process and all that kind of jazz. We're huge, like we're trying to. So like everybody's like, oh, and they're complaining about this. So it's like, so I feel you, man. Like we were there with you somehow.
Yeah.
So Godspeed. It was.
That's right. That's right. Thanks for soldiering on with us.
Yeah,
no problem.
I've been through all the transitions, and you're right. Speaking to it from looking at SDKs, looking at different development languages, and looking at the different devices and stuff. We actually talked about this last night in our podcast. We talked about the Yes and the Blue and some of those new manufacturers who are going to be able to pump out some hardware for the economic side and being able to kind of not really repurpose, and I'm using air quotes here, Android hardware, but to kind of make it unique to Windows, and that's really cool to see that happen, and I hope that there's an explosion in that space, obviously.
Well, just speaking pragmatically, with quotes in the air, when you got all this hardware is the same,
Yep.
the same guts, the same ARM chips, the stacked memory, the way they put the LTE, like with a Qualcomm chipset, all that stuff is the same. Everybody's using the same hardware, and so it's not some giant leap to put Windows Phone OS on an Android device.
Right.
Maybe 5 years ago things would have been more unique, right? But they're not anymore.
Oh,
Exactly.
no, totally.
Gus?
So to step onto something that you said, so the future of some of the Microsoft devices are going into these less RAM, lower speed, products, right? So that tells me that the developers or actually to go back to something that you were talking about even earlier, really need to get those best practices, right, for what they're writing for the Windows operating system. Where can people get those best practices?
Well, some of them are just great principles. Measuring memory. You know how you always hear about people who just go do these big projects and they think they're going to bolt on performance at the end of the project and stuff like that instead of making it part of the project from the first minute. It's things like that. There are all kinds of design patterns that you've probably heard of and different ways to build apps. I know lots of people, for better or worse, feel that MVVM and building for Windows Phone, and maybe now by proxy building modern apps for big Windows 8, are synonymous.
Yes.
There are lots of people who think they are not able to. If I don't know MVVM, I can't do it. It's a great design pattern, but I also find that to be really unfortunate. It's just a design pattern. You know what? Absolutely. There's, make sure your stuff's testable. We've always tried to separate our business logic from our UI and a lot of that stuff, and there's a lot of ways to skin that cat. And we used MVC long before MVVM. But while you're building stuff, don't let whatever the cool new pattern of the week is get in the way of building the most efficient deal. I'm absolutely with you there. Gus, you should absolutely, in your emulator, use the emulator that only has the 512 meg of RAM,
Oh,
the
yeah.
small one. Target the most low-end thing, which is laughable to me that I can't even, it's, well, you know, after building all these things for the Pocket PC and Windows Mobile over the years, I mean, I built so many big-time solutions that run giant companies, and my limitations were 32K or 32 meg of memory. You know, anybody who's developed for CE and then Windows Mobile 5 and 6, all those versions, all those had Windows CE 5 underneath the covers, which was a slotted operating system that you couldn't have more than 32 different processes ever, and each process could not use more than 32 meg of RAM. But you never even got that much because of the way the DLLs work. They would push memory pressure down across all the slots, and so you were up against it. This made true warrior developers in my mind is when you became great at building stuff for the Pocket PC and Windows Mobile. And a lot of those folks, because I used to mentor these people and train them on best practices. I came from the embedded world, or that grew up to things like, I don't know, the Palm Pilot, where your apps have to be measured in K. And so it felt refreshing to have so many resources on the Pocket PC and Windows Mobile to maybe have several meg for your app. But still a slow CPU. Now today, you know, we've got quad-core CPUs. Maybe you've got your Nokia 1520 running a Qualcomm 800 chipset at light speed, you know? And so I often find it laughable because I'll still hear people talking about these are really constrained devices. And it's like, really? How about building VB3 apps on Windows 3.1 when you only had like 2 meg of RAM or 4 meg of RAM? It's like, really?
Hey, I came from the Commodore 64 where I had to squeeze bytes out of everything, so I know exactly how that felt. And I did some mobile development too for a company up here, and I remember running out of memory consistently, right? So you had to really optimize your code and make sure that you were taking smaller bits and move this, and you know, the garbage collection was at a maximum, right? So you had to make sure that everything functioned, and it was tough, and it was very tough. I mean, it was one of the toughest projects I've had to try to get certain things to work properly. But that being said, I came from the 64, like you, with the Timex and all that stuff. So we actually have been there before, and I think we're getting there again, and we'll probably get there again in the future as well, because I've seen this industry go completely cyclical, right? Everything has to be desktop based. Then let's go to the mainframe, right? Well, that's technically what the cloud is.
Right.
And we're going through everything again. Pretty soon we'll be back to, you know, 3-tiered operating systems with the cloud as a back end and yada yada yada. So
yes,
I mean,
my remote procedure call.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Yep, RPCs. So you know, I can see it. I just think it's really cool that the operating system actually is running so good on lower end hardware, and we're actually seeing that out of Windows 8 too, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And you know, on big Windows 8, you know, that new update we just had for 8.1 just recently further shrink the size of the OS. You know, so we can play well on all these tablets and low-end tablets. You know, you heard the big announcements at Build about everything under 9 inches is free, right?
Yep.
For the OEMs. And so we need to make sure all that stuff counts, you know, and I'm excited about processors from Intel, you know, like the Bay Trail and all the subsequent ones, you know, after that, where you can get x86, that Atom type thing, while getting insane battery life like you do with ARM. Those are all hopeful. I'm hoping you're hearing a theme from me. The theme is small from the Timex, small from bit encoded packets from when we had to pay by the byte for wireless, and still caring about that today, even though you have ridiculous sick 4G, it still matters. And small when you're writing the code on your device, right?
Yep. Well, I hear you. I am absorbing.
Yeah, one of the things that just actually came to mind was one of the problems that we had with, you know, the old phaser, you know, symbol handhelds, right, was that their wireless sucked. and actually it wasn't much better connecting them via Ethernet.
Yeah.
So I remember sitting there with a friend of mine that had a Windows phone, right? And it would have been prior to Windows Phone 7. And we ran the same app on both of them, and the symbol is sitting there connected to Ethernet, right? Chugging away, downloading whatever it was downloading, and it took, I think, like 4 minutes, right? Let's just say 4 minutes. The Windows Phone going through 3G, or actually it might have even been slower than 3G at the time,
right,
going through the firewall back in, did it in like 17 seconds. And it's like, wow. You know, so, yeah, well, yeah, that is huge, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you squeeze, you know, the blood from a turnip when the turnip's dried up and dead? I mean, you just can't do it. I mean, there's just certain limitations that you cannot pass.
Yeah.
But
think about the mobile web, for instance. So I joked with you guys earlier. I'd be the guy for the last 5 years who would also do a mobile web session before HTML5 was starting to get big and all the other fun stuff we could do there, because I think those are all really important. But I have these slide decks. I have literally, I don't know, maybe almost 100 best practices, almost, for what I consider to be good things for the mobile web. They have nothing to do with features of HTML5 or AJAX or anything cool. They are all about principles about making sure that web page pops, because there's plenty of statistics you're going to read out there that says if that mobile web page doesn't load in 6 seconds, the person's going to leave. On the
knows that firsthand. He was hired to go somewhere and knock something like that out. He's like, hey, I can. He's like, our website's taking way too long. And he's like, no, I can have it done in like 2 seconds. I can have it there.
That one, by the way, was 1:53 down to less than 2 seconds.
Wow.
So,
and I mean, that you know, that may not sound like but when you're looking at something,
yes,
it's eternal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to take care and please our customers. We need to delight our customers and our users,
right?
Not just be good enough. And so, whether it's a native app you're building where each screen just pops as it's going by and data is displayed because you thought about everything, you know, whether it's, you know, your data transmission was super efficient, the way you store data locally and the way you're caching, both at the server side and caching locally and in memory to make sure that your screens pop and making sure that it runs great on a 520. Same with the best practices about maybe saying, well, gosh, when I'm building a mobile website, I'm going to make sure that my goal, whether I hit it or not, I don't know, is a 20K web page. And I'm going to follow a whole lot of best practices, even before I think about all the fun stuff I'm going to do with HTML5 functionality. Or, you know, I mean, right now I'm seeing lots of people using, and I apologize, I know we're just kind of veering off here, but this is still mobile related. You know, there's lots of great JavaScript DOM frameworks out there that people are going nuts over these days, and they're really doing some great stuff. But don't forget about how big those JavaScript files are that are being downloaded, that are coming along with them. So there's always trade-offs, you know.
Sure, yeah. I was just actually reading about that 2 days ago. Yeah, I was because I was going back and I was trying to see more efficiency, right? Because I want to be able to write to, like, when I go in and I talk to a kid and we're maybe working on a Raspberry Pi or we're doing something small. You got to be able to keep that down, you know. And I was just reading about it, so it's interesting you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's as simple as field naming in JSON, right? When you're transmitting, the less characters your field names are, the smaller your data transmission, the faster your data goes.
Absolutely.
You know,
Andy Wigley and I, he's a good friend of mine. He was an MVP and he works at Microsoft. He's in the UK. We've been buds forever, back to the early Pocket PC, like embedded Visual Basic and things like that. So we would do these sessions where, you know, we would show you, all right, I'm going to grab, like you're talking about JSON and getting things smaller. I need to return this list of customers, you know, first name, last name, bunch of information like that. And I would show you maybe 6 different ways to get the same data, you know, and you hear me bashing on SOAP and XML. Well, SOAP, XML, and data sets, that would be my extreme case. Or maybe to pull that back, you know, was like, I don't know, I'll be exaggerating if I say it was close to a meg, so let's just say it was maybe 500K or something like that. And then we would switch from data sets to XML, and it would drop down to maybe 200K. And then we would switch from that to SOAP and JSON, and now we're down to 100. Then we do REST and JSON, and and then compression. And then before you know it, I would return the same amount of data in 632 bytes.
Wow.
And it's an eye-opener, but people don't think about it. And I don't want to call programmers lazy, because sometimes you don't know that option's available to you. But that's a best practice right there.
Yeah.
There are 10 different ways to pull back this exact same set of data. Pick the one that only is measured in bytes.
Yeah. Going back to my little mobility shot, I had to transfer a database that had items for a store or whatever it was back to this handheld, right? And the handheld had to chunk it down because you couldn't just do a file transfer, right? We're talking megs.
Yeah.
So we ended up using zip. Websites, transfers, everything to chunk these down into a binary transfer to the device, and then build it back together and unzip it because it was much faster.
Yeah.
Because the bandwidth just isn't there.
Absolutely.
And the scary thing is these were in satellite stores that could have had 2400 baud modems connecting in. I mean, they're that bad. So.
Totally. Oh,
this was only a few years ago too, by the way.
Well, people always ask. I've been sucked into so many of these merge replication projects over the last decade for all those field devices and everything, and lots of customers like doing that. The compact framework, and if they use SQL-C and merge, it got them to market faster. They didn't have to write as much code; it just handled it for you, and a lot of the value in that was kind of like you're saying. Merge used a binary protocol. And it was compressed, and it had restarts. It had, it could chunk things down. If a device needed to download, 100 meg worth of stuff, which may seem crazy, it could accurately chunk it because it was designed. It was designed for unreliable GPRS networks, and so I'm always thinking, build a solution that's gonna just rock in the slowest, most unreliable, horrible environment imaginable. And then everything else is gravy, right?
Yep. Well, and there's a best practice right there, right? As you said, grab the crappiest, slowest, no memory having emulator and make sure it rocks your code, right?
Yeah, and we have tooling too in our emulator that comes in Visual Studio where you can throttle back the wireless connectivity. So take advantage of that stuff.
I haven't actually tried. I'm gonna have to try that. I'm gonna have to try that because we're developing and Andy Long. He's a great developer. He's got 42 apps in the marketplace right now, and he's working with us to develop our own. We already have a Windows Phone app, but we're like making it solid, and then I'm gonna have to check out. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
I can honestly tell you that I don't know many developers that actually check the wire either, right?
Right.
And I came, after all of my stuff, I actually came through the server side, right? The infrastructure side with routers and whatnot. So that's one of the first things I look at is, can I ping it? What kind of network traffic are we having? What's going on across the wire? After the commonalities of, is your SQL statement okay? Do we have indexes, right? Then what's going across the wire? Why is it taking 10 seconds, right?
Don't get me started with all the crazy stuff people are doing with SQL these days, with all the ORM mappers. Oh, sorry.
In mobility? Okay. Sure.
No, just in general. It's funny? I'll tell you one thing real quick. So I go bail out companies all the time. Like, I've had a lot of different jobs in Microsoft where I'm doing different things that are unrelated sometimes. I get phone calls or people come through my blog at a minimum every month, sometimes multiple weeks per month, for old school stuff that I thought was in my rearview mirror, from the last decade or so or more, and all the time. And so I will find a way. I'll have the money, or some account teams will figure it out, and I'll go fly to all four corners of the earth for real to come bail out these customers. And Cortana. Love it.
I should have learned that for the thing, but man, it's burning in here. Go ahead.
Let me tell you something I've learned, and this goes back to your point, Gus, about the server side. As a mobile guy, when I go to bail out these customers, and I'm not going to say any names.
Right.
Where do I end up spending all my time? On the device? No. I spend about 70, 80, sometimes 90% of my time on the server. That's where I spend. As a mobile guy, I'm always on the server. My biggest problems, yes, people need to know all those best practices to make their apps tiny and efficient and all that stuff, and that's part of it. But most of the time, I see customers hang themselves because they don't know how to build high-scale systems at all. They download a white paper from MSDN or somewhere, and they set it up on their laptop, and they go, hey, this works, woo! And let's roll it out to 10,000 devices. And then they wonder why the performance and the scalability just craters, and they don't understand. And I've got customers where I've had to build systems that can handle tens or hundreds of thousands of mobile devices going over crappy wireless data networks. And so that's a lesson I've learned over the years, just kind of beat into me, not by choice. And that's kind of where so it's ironic. I spend way more time on the server to facilitate mobility. And this is where we are today. Think about I think the focus of the last 5 years, let's say, around mobility and apps has been consumer stuff. And now we're finally getting to the enterprise, even though I thought we were already at the enterprise back in 2003. But anyway, I'm always early to these things. So the server side, getting the server side right. If you build that app that connects to some back-end data and does some stuff, which is most of everything you're going to do in the enterprise, what if it accidentally is successful? Or what if it's an app that a big company needs to reach out to their customers? It's possible that there could be millions of those customers. And so this isn't your little work group app that you built in the 90s where you had 50 people connecting to an Access database, And it's not even an app where you can have it just connecting back to one SQL server through a couple of load balance IIS servers. This is where you really, really have to know about the architectural principles about building extreme high-scale, systems. And I think those are some awesome best practices that, again, a lot of people don't know about. Just what are those building blocks around architecture, building blocks around building high-scale, high-performant back-end systems, because that kind of goes back to that UX, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you probably heard the little saying, or maybe you haven't, who knows? The fastest query you can ever make against the database is the one you don't have to make. If the answer to your question is in RAM and cache, then you're faster. But it's not just faster, because there is a direct correlation between speed, performance, and scalability. If I got 10,000 people waiting in line to get an answer from SQL Server, and the answer is in RAM, then the first person gets the answer, and the next person gets his, and so it increases your scale. And so anyway, I spent a lot of time, especially with replicating and doing not only just replicating straight to devices, but then using replication to scale out horizontally partitioned SQL Server, actually, in ways that a lot of people weren't doing. Because I don't know, I might be like you. I'm a junkie. I'll sit there and watch different YouTube videos from architects who work at Facebook, for instance, or at Google, or at PayPal, or your eBay, or things like that. And because they openly will sit there and talk about what did they do to make their system. I mean, think about Facebook. It's you and a billion of your best friends. How did they do that? Well, there's some basic building blocks about how they did that, and they did it all open source. But you know what? They don't have a billion people hitting MySQL. They're using NoSQL, but they're still one of the few that are still using the heck out of MySQL. But they're using MySQL replication to shard out and have replicas everywhere. Maybe 30,000 replicas or whatever. And they're using distributed cache like Memcache, and they're doing you're scaling out at every single layer. And those are the things that we can do at Microsoft. And I always have to remind people, it's like, and without even talking about cloud stuff, just basic principles. Even on-prem, it's like, you know what? We've got the App Fabric cache on Windows Server. You should be using that stuff.
I swear to God, I wish the Matrix was right, because I would just take your knowledge and just plug it right in, right there in the back of the skull.
Exactly.
It's funny that you bring up caching, because I'll talk about that a little bit later, but caching is one of the easiest ways to speed up an app. And I don't know, JJ and I are working on a little thing together, but that's one of the first things I put in there. And you don't even know that yet, JJ. But it's in there.
I know, Kevin. That's a wonderful surprise. Thanks for sharing it on the show.
And you know, we're talking about 500 or 600 milliseconds, right, down to 21. That's a huge increase, right?
Yeah.
So how many people can you fit in there, right? Getting the same information, all of a sudden you scale very easily. And you're right. And even App Fabric Cache, which I've barely touched. I've done it. I've used it once or twice just to understand it. But that's a fantastic, application. And of course, like you said, they have the open source versions and whatnot, and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
but
people are using Redis. People are, but you're right. I would say use any cache. Use output caching. Use whatever. Or I think we've in .NET we've kind of formalized that object that previously was just for ASP.NET, and I think we've got it where you can do the caching anywhere. But you should actually be using that on your websites, your web services, no doubt about it.
Yeah. I'll tell you, for any company or person that happens to be running their own web server, I can tell you personally, memory is much cheaper than buying a new box.
Absolutely.
Oh, sure.
That RAM.
Yes.
Which is a great segue to how much I'm just a mega fan of SQL Server 2014. And
I haven't seen it yet.
In-memory tables. Well, at Build, I was doing my session on Web API stuff and scaling out and consuming that from mobile devices, and I talked about a lot of the stuff I'm talking about here, using the replication or using always on to shard out, to break apart your database so that you don't have everybody hitting one. You want different parts hitting different nodes, and then using the caching in front of that. But heck, you know what? You need to take advantage. It's amazing. It's like night and day. I'm so bullish. SQL 2014 is one of the best products we've ever created. The in-memory tables. Okay. Well, I mean, it's kind of common sense. When my whole database is in RAM, because we're saying, hey, maybe we should take advantage of that weird 64-bit computing thing.
Right.
You think?
Crazy idea.
Yeah, crazy talk. And RAM is just cheap. It's not like $800 for 16 meg of RAM that I bought for my OS2 system a long time ago. It's cheap. So use it. And so in SQL 2014, you don't have to have the whole database in RAM. You can do it on table-by-table basis. And it sits there. It has a background thread to do the writes back to the disk. But make sure you're never using a database again without an SSD.
Definitely.
That goes without saying. And then if all your tables in RAM, everything is at light speed. Oh, and if that's not awesome, because you've already been hearing maybe the performance stuff. I mean, people are like 30x increase in performance when you upgrade, from a regular database to this one. I really am so bullish on SQL 2014. I think this is the one where we're going to just put everyone else out of their misery. We've had some early adopter customers that would go through. We have these things called TAP programs, and they would upgrade. Just upgrading from SQL 2008, for instance, to 2014, even before migrating to in-memory tables. The things we did with memory and buffering and stuff, just in the base system, people were getting 2x, doubling their performance just with the upgrade. If I go talk to a CIO and I tell them, I'm going to double your performance, will you buy this product? They're going to say, absolutely, I'm going to buy it. Then when I tell them, as you migrate these tables to in-memory tables, I'm going to get you another 30x performance over the 2x I just gave you. Well, how much would you pay now? And then also, back to, I'm all about writing stored procedures, and I know you've had other folks on here who, we use Entity Framework and ORM things. I've had different experiences with lots of ORM mappers in the past from different technologies, and we've had to rip them out of solutions because they were wondering why their high-scale solution was so slow. Well, so part of it is that mentality of getting back to the metal. So the stored procedures that work with these in-memory tables are different as well. They use C++, and they create machine code stored procs, and so they're special. And so now, can you imagine your website or your web service with ADO.NET hitting that native stored proc, hitting in-memory data, pulling it back in light speed, and then you've already got your caching layer, and you've already scaled out horizontally on the data, and then you've got 1 million IIS servers load balance. We're just talking, light speed, rocket time. And so all that is worth a lot of money.
And so much more that you can get done. Right?
Absolutely.
You're not really having to sacrifice anymore necessarily. You're able to kind of keep those concepts and think forward even, like, okay, well then we can knock this out too while this is yeah, that's hot.
Yeah.
Well, and the cool thing is that's also bringing back some people that maybe coded in C++ and didn't want to go to C# or .NET or whatever. Now they have new life again writing stored procedures as well.
Well, the funny thing is, it's still, that's the funny thing, it's still like T-SQL stored procs.
Mm-hmm.
It just compiles them.
Oh, really? Okay, never mind then.
Yeah, you're right. They're not writing C. You're right. No.
For a second, Gus, some of my other fellow students were like,
oh well. Sorry, guys.
Oh,
but
we're
that's still cool.
learning something that's worth a darn. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Absolutely.
And for those entity framework or whatever ORM zealots, you can still call stored procedures from it, and that's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No doubt about it. I just think it's all going to be a lot more goodness for our websites and web services, whatever the endpoint is, when all that stuff in the back end gets faster.
Well, especially mobility too.
Yeah,
right?
and business enterprise apps and all this. I didn't. Sorry, Gus. Go ahead.
Oh, that's good. No, I was just going to say that it's just mobility reaps the benefits as well. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what is it? The numbers just keep going. It's that huge curve of how many people are engaged and on the movement. In fact, I was talking with a business at one of the Microsoft stores about how they're, so they want an application. So it was a landscaping company, and they wanted to be able to have, when their agents are out in the field, to be able to manipulate like yards and landscapes and all that kind of stuff to show products and in the field, and they were talking about the kind of the scalability and all of the different things there. So I mean, if you just hearing you talk about how you're pinging off and sending that data over and how much easier that is going to make that process and the creation of those applications and how faster and better experience it's going to be. That's phenomenal. That's awesome.
Absolutely. You also can, if you think to the number of nodes I might have had to horizontally partition, let's say with SQL Server in the past, I won't have to necessarily do as much or any, because the in-RAM capabilities of this kind of blow that away oftentimes, that extra need for sharding. And so, again, RAM is cheap. Use a box with a lot of RAM. If you're going to upload a VM to Azure, use one of the bigger ones that has like the 56 mega RAM or stuff like that. Put all that stuff in RAM, and you'll be amazed of how many more of those folks out in the field, the lawn service people, the guy driving the truck to deliver chips to the grocery store, the person on the pipeline, or the person working in the plant, all that stuff.
Exactly. I kind of got off thing, but that was my point, is that so many people are going to be doing much more things on mobile and so much more less, and we're already seeing that on the desktop or a stationary thing, and obviously Microsoft with Surface Pro 3 and just they're big mobile first, cloud first, and all this kind of jazz. So yeah, I mean, like you guys said, and that was kind of where I was getting to, is this experience change, right? And not feeling like you're on dial-up, and it doesn't. You don't necessarily have to be even using a Windows product, but just an overall, just the overall sites and experiences that we can deliver to all audiences. So that's very
absolutely. It's all good for our customers in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I lived through one exciting time with the bulletin board systems and the invention of 9600, 19.2, and 56K modems, and now DSL and cable and yada yada yada. Now I think we're going to see it again with mobility and servers, right? So at one point we scaled out servers. Now we're going to scale out actually developing the faster pieces so that we don't have to do that, right? So now we're going to come back in before we expand again. Which I think is going to be really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more.
Cool. Well, since we're running short on time, I wanted to get through a few other things. What do you do away from your keyboard, Rob? Do you have any hobbies or passions?
All right.
He's going to say something.
Here comes.
Submarine warrior.
I'm a writer of children's books.
Right.
All right, busted. Yes. So, yes, among other things, yes, because I've written like 5 computer books over the years, and a few years back I wrote my first children's book, and so, like you hear all the times as an author, write about things you know about. And so since I got to live on a submarine and I worked with the SEAL teams and had a lot of experiences that were Clancy-like, within some other crazy ideas, that's kind of got me started there. And so I'm actually working on a sequel right now. But yeah, so being able to tie in a very, very techie, Clancy way of what's going on in a submarine, like you might have seen. I remember when the Hunt for Red October first came out, the book, and and people were like,
I saw the movie first, unfortunately, but I read the book.
They're like, you can't write about all this stuff. You'll bore readers. They don't want to know about all the details. And yet he broke all the rules as an author, and he went into the deepest details of how a submarine works and all the gadgets and cool stuff, and it totally worked, and people loved it. And I think it changed that genre, and you saw it in the movies. And so when I wrote my first children's book here, I absolutely went into the details and described, and I'm teaching these kids how this stuff actually works. And they're like, oh, wow, I had no idea. So it's been really rewarding. It's fun. It's obviously a different life and a different audience. I go to schools sometimes, and I get to read to kids, which is fun. I've got a bunch of kids hounding me and pestering me to get the next book out. I'm still waiting for the big payoff, the J.K. Rowling kind of thing for me, where I don't have to punch a clock anymore. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so my book, kind of targets that middle grade, kind of like Harry Potter and those kind of books.
The tweens.
Where it's at. But probably like the Harry Potter books as they went along, it's starting to get a little scarier and a little darker and a little older as they go along. The other fun thing I've been able to do is, some of these classes where I'd go read this stuff to the kids. I've had teachers come back and I've delivered kind of science classes to children, basically the science of submarines. Mm-hmm. And so I would, I would teach kids what nuclear fission is and how it works and why it works and how a submarine runs on a reactor and how we have coolant and how we make electricity and spin propellers to do that, how we make fresh water from the seawater that's all around us by using desalination, simple stuff that they could do as a science experiment, where you boil the water and then it condenses and you get the salt out. Tell them how we make our own air from seawater. So basic stuff you learned in school in science class or in chemistry, breaking, there's oxygen out there in the water. Let's see if we can get it, right?
Yep.
So,
I know I'm too old, but I wish you could adopt me.
It's funny that Rob actually kind of caveated into that, because next week we have Scott Hanselman, one of your coworkers, coming on to actually talk STEM in schools.
That's
not
great.
About coding for once.
Yeah,
right? Which is kind of odd.
And it's great. Scott just rocks, and so getting to these kids, and that's always been my thing writing computer books, is the most important thing you can do is try to make these complex things simple and understandable.
And fun.
Yeah.
Engaging and all that. And that doesn't necessarily need to be just for a kid. I mean, because I come across people who are making the transition of job changes and stuff like that. Believe it or not, I mean, I talk to as many people as I can, and some of them are making lifestyle changes. So, like moving from, say, a factory job to or manufacturing, or over to the IT or something like that. It doesn't always necessarily. Sometimes you find a crowd that you didn't know that you were going to hit with some of this stuff, and you do it by kind of an engaging way. If it's interesting and fun, and I mean, that's why we all liked watching Bugs Bunny from young to old. I mean, like, that's just kind of how that works. I mean, if it's intriguing, it's intriguing, and that's just kind of the way. That's really cool.
And you hit a good point there with other people, because while there's a lot of talk about helping our kids, and you see code.org and a lot of great groups there, they're trying to teach kids how to get into this stuff. It's every bit as important to help out adults who are coming from different walks of life or they need some help, you know. Because if you've been on board a submarine as a sonarman or a torpedo man, or you're just coming back from Afghanistan and you're great at shooting a rifle, but you need help in the same way that these kids need help with STEM. And so I think it's just endless, really rewarding opportunities to take that time and go engage with these different audiences to bring them over.
Well, not only that, but in our industry, we can even take a lot of the wounded warriors who may have had, construction jobs or law enforcement or whatever they may have gone into that would have been their next step, right? But now they're struggling. If we can get them into some science and technology jobs where they can just, come into an office and work, that's even another lease on life, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's you can keep spinning the ball and find more and more things that we could go out and do, which I would be totally involved in. I think it's great.
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Rob, lastly, we were talking a little bit before the show, but I just real quick, the application pick, or I'd like for you to somehow condense maybe a 15-minute conversation down to like 2 for your application type of pick, and then what you see as the next technological niche or the future of tech.
Okay. All right. Go out. Sometimes, as we kind of talked about earlier, things are cyclical, and sometimes things from the past come back to the future. So all of a sudden people are waking up going, hey, enterprise mobility, it's a thing. So that's fine, even though we've already built a million solutions that followed a lot of the same principles around mobility in the enterprise. Apps, offline data, efficient syncing of data back to back-end systems. In fact, if you get right down to it, I'm going to argue that 90% or more of all enterprise apps are exactly the same. You download data from some server, data source, you look at the data, you add data, you modify data, and you send it back. That's it. That's how most apps are. Yeah, there's business logic and other stuff in between, but that's what they all do for the most part. So because of that, what's the new way of doing that kind of stuff? I have done the old way ad nauseum over the last more than a decade and a half, with SQL-C and replication and RDA and stuff like that. The new thing is something we announced at Build, and I got to do a session on in Houston a few weeks ago at TechEd. So we did an addition to Azure Mobile Services, where we have added a lightweight sync technology to help make it easier to facilitate those offline apps that the enterprise needs. We know there's no ubiquitous wireless networks out there, right? So you're either going to roll your own, you're either going to use the web API and build REST services and do it yourself, which you absolutely can. But this new technology, it actually uses the web API. And let me give you a quick, and so it's a easy NuGet package and all that other stuff. So
we'll have that in our show notes. So we'll make sure we have a link for it. Okay.
So Azure Mobile Services is working with our backend stuff in Azure. It's cross-platform. For the sync, we took a dependency on SQLite, because we know SQLite runs everywhere, right? It runs on iPhone and Android and everywhere else, and we got it working. A bunch of us worked on different frameworks to get it working on big Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8. So SQLite. We have Microsoft OpenText. We have got a kind of a good wrapper to talk to SQLite. You can do it traditional looking SQL. You can do it where it looks more like LINQ to SQL. And then the Azure Mobile Services folks have put a wrapper around SQLite to do change tracking, because that's a critical thing. So basically, it has a simple paradigm. You call pull to pull down data from Azure. You say push to push it up. It's using Entity Framework 6 on the back end. You create your models on the device. It's going to create the database for you in SQLite. It's going to do change tracking as you're adding, updating data locally on the device offline, and then you do push, and it's going to reconcile those changes and push them back. It can go back to SQL Azure. It can go back to table storage. It can go to MongoDB. With our new BizTalk services that we've got going, kind of fledgling, happening up in Azure now, we've got some easy ways to get it to go right through Azure and back down to your on-prem SQL Server if you prefer. So I'm excited about this. It looks a lot like stuff I've done in the past, and I have customers calling me all the time saying, "Hey Rob, what's the next version of the mobile database, mobile sync, blah 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 blah."
Right.
This Azure Mobile Services Sync is that, and it's cross-platform, and it's rocking. And so I've got a video from TechEd you can check out if you want to find out more.
Well, we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely. We'll maybe, depending on how that is, we'll even put it like right underneath this episode so they can watch this and then watch that. That would be hot.
Sure.
So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but yeah, you just download bits from the SQLite.org. We got NuGet packages for the wrappers to allow you to access it easily, and then you can go to town. And so you can build it with Universal Apps. It works with Xamarin. We've got bits that are working with those guys now. And so, I think that's some exciting new stuff that's really coming out. It's still in the alpha stages right now, but it's coming along.
That's still awesome. Really awesome.
Something I wanted to mention before we let you go was I had promised one of my buddies from Microsoft. So if everybody could go and check out the app, basically I'm looking at it right now. It's the App Enthusiasts app for both Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8. Go check this out because it's a way for some apps to get seen that maybe not necessarily would have been showcased. So it's an Apps Enthusiast showcase. The applications created by developers all around the world for Windows Phone and Windows 8, so you can stay up with the cool newest creations by students. So I just want to make sure that because we do have a diverse audience, we have a lot of students that listen, obviously for educational purposes. We have people who are in the IT field that dig it, and people who like to in their commute or whatever. So if you get a chance and you like what you've heard and that stuff, and you've always kind of wanted to see what's the next and newest coming thing, please go check those out. That's App Enthusiasts.
That's really cool. That is definitely really cool.
Gus, you're up.
Okay. Well, the only thing that I really have left for Rob is, where can people find you? I mean, Twitter, web, conferences coming up.
Sure.
What's coming up?
Absolutely. So at Rob Tiffany on Twitter. Just go to robtiffany.com is my blog. You probably don't want to go to my Rob Tiffany whatever thing on Facebook because it's more of an author page for my other life, which is really wrong with that. I have to juggle a lot of things. I have to because I have this double life, and so I have to maintain this other persona. I have like a submarinewarriors.com website where I'm that guy, and then I'm the computer guy on the other one. Coming up, we have internal Microsoft stuff coming up midsummer. We do an internal deal called Tech Ready that I'm doing stuff at. But I'm going to be, how TechEd continues on. We just did North America, but I'll be in Auckland for TechEd New Zealand in September. We've got TechEd Europe happening in Barcelona in October, and I have no idea beyond that. And I promise to keep blogging on crazy news stuff. You'll probably expect to see a lot more content coming from me around this Azure Mobile Services Sync stuff that I talked about. It's great to do a video, but I'm going to start putting some concrete code out there and kind of going step by step to try to make that simple.
Yep. Cool. Good to keep in mind for the fall season. We may see something that we may be wanting to write to. But
yeah. Oh yeah,
exactly, and we'll have to get you back on, and maybe we can have you demo that Azure Sync too.
Yeah,
and you can show our audience exactly how it works. We'll see if we can schedule something in the future here. At the end of the show, we usually throw an application or a NuGet package out. Mine this week is the Web API Cache. And one of the reasons why I like this is because MVC as a whole usually has, their output cache parameter where you can set things. But Web API never really took that because it's using a different namespace. It uses the HTTP namespace, not the MVC namespace. So by adding this NuGet package, all you have to do is tag your controller with a tag on it that says Web API Cache, and it allows it to automatically cache that piece. That being said, the awesome part about this is that it goes ahead and works almost exactly like Output Cache does, just a different namespace and whatnot, but it allows you to cache everything. So I was actually able to get a couple of calls that I was working on earlier in the week from about 500 or 700 milliseconds down to about 21 to 51 milliseconds, and that's
awesome.
that's a huge change, right? And that was just going into a browser, bringing it down, and doing things. So even going to the app might be a little bit quicker. And I know we were talking earlier about Angular and Knockout and all the really cool new, bindings. Even going to that would be even faster. So I think it's a great tool, and it's kind of funny that Rob brought that up because it was something that I had picked 2 weeks ago, actually, when Rob and I were talking about the show. That being said, I want to move on to announcements, too, because as I mentioned earlier, next week we're actually having Scott Hanselman join us, and we're going to talk about STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and we're going to talk about schools and what we as developers can do to go out and help our children, get involved and excited about math. And I know a lot of the things that I thought was cool when I was a teenager, right, in junior high, like Doctor Who and coding and doing some other things, and I was the outcast, is now the cool thing in schools, which is really awesome. But engineering and math and certain other things still are not taking off. So we're going to have a few talk about that. We'll probably get into a bit about robotics too, because my son was in robotics. I know Scott has been tweeting a little bit about Lego Mindstorm and some other things with his kids, and we'll get into a little bit about that. Also, I will be in at CodeStock July 11th and 12th in Knoxville, Tennessee. After that conference in Baraboo, Wisconsin at Kalahari, and after that, Dev Connections in Vegas. So those are my announcements since Rob already gave some of his. JJ, do you have anything?
Yeah, I actually do. So there's a couple of things that's going on. September the 18th through the 19th, I will be at Strange Loop Conference. It's in St. Louis, and we're going to be covering the developer conference. Gus, you know what this is, obviously. So it's really cool. It's got a cool name. I know it's a strange little bit STL, but it's really neat. We're going to be there for that. There's a lot of cool stuff coming down the pipe. Me and Gus's project's going to be coming out. That's going to be hot. There's just a lot of stuff in the future. STLchic.com. That's chick without the K. That is our sister site about women in tech and how to be more involved there. Please, everybody who's listening to this, go check that out as well. Give us some feedback and let us know how we're doing on that side, as well as come to our site and let us know what you think. And we're also working on getting our Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 applications, point ones, out the door. So that's going to be hot. Also our iOS and Android, so that's going to be fun. Just wanted to say again, Gus, thank you for everything that you do. Rob, thank you so much for being on the show. From the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate it. You were a fantastic guest. We had an awesome, spirited conversation. We'd love to have you back in the future. So thank you so much for being on.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So yeah, we very much enjoyed your company, and the talk was fantastic. I very much enjoyed myself.
Yeah, this is what it's all about. So to all of our fans, we love and thank you for your support of the show. So from the entire STL Tech Talk crew, good coding. We're out.